My children always spoke of their inheritances in hushed, greedy tones, like secrets whispered in the dark. They never noticed the way my fingers, gnarled with age, moved with an almost surgical precision, looping yarn into patterns they dismissed as quaint. For them, the soft click-clack of my crochet hook was background noise, a comforting sign that Grandma was harmlessly occupied, far from their financial machinations. But in that quiet rhythm, I wasn't just crafting wool into blankets. I was weaving the threads of their undoing, each stitch a tiny knot in the rope that would eventually tighten around their carefully constructed lies. The vibrant colors I chose for their gifts were not for joy, but for visibility, ensuring every imperfection in their grand design would eventually come to light. They believed my world was small, confined to my armchair and my yarn basket. But what if my seemingly placid existence was merely the eye of a very calculated storm? The silence in my house used to feel like peace, a quiet hum after years of raising children and tending to a husband. Now, it often felt like an echo, a cavern hollowed out by their absence, or worse, by their indifferent presence. My son, Arthur, would breeze in, a whirlwind of important phone calls and urgent deadlines, barely sparing a glance for me as he rummaged through the fridge or barked into his headset. "Mom, you good?" he'd mumble, his eyes already scanning his phone screen, a question posed to the air more than to me. It was like asking if the wallpaper was good, a formality, with no expectation of a real answer. My daughter, Bethany, was a different kind of storm. She'd arrive with a flurry of shopping bags and complaints about her latest boutique haul or a minor social slight. Her visits felt less like a daughter checking on her mother and more like a queen inspecting her minor territories, expecting homage and perhaps a quiet word of admiration for her new shoes. She'd sit for a moment, perched delicately on the edge of the sofa, before sighing dramatically about her tax burden or the difficulty of maintaining appearances. Her gaze would drift to the antique sideboard, then to the Persian rug, never quite meeting mine, but assessing the value of every object in the room. They called, sometimes. Quick calls, efficient and transactional. "Are you feeling all right, Mom?" Arthur would ask, his voice already tapering off before I could properly answer. "We're just checking in, making sure everything's settled." Settled. That word, a comfortable blanket for them, felt like a shroud to me. It meant I was predictable, unmoving, neatly tucked away in the corner of their lives. In those moments, when their voices faded from the phone line or their footsteps retreated from my porch, a chill would settle over me. It wasn't the cold of winter, but the quiet, creeping frost of neglect. I was like a forgotten teacup on a shelf, chipped perhaps, but still holding memories of warmth, yet never chosen for a fresh brew. And as the days blurred into weeks, marked only by the shifting sunlight across my living room floor, a new companion emerged from the quiet, my crochet hook. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a conversation. The yarn, soft and vibrant, didn't judge or interrupt. Each loop, each pull, each careful stitch was a choice, a small act of creation in a life that felt increasingly dictated by others. The rhythmic click-clack was my heartbeat, steady and true. While Arthur chased his next dubious business venture and Bethany worried over the shade of her new handbag, I was here, creating. Creating something, anything, to fill the vast emptiness they had carved around me. Sometimes, when I looked at the growing squares of a new blanket, a thought would prickle at the edges of my mind. They saw these humble blankets, these simple projects, as proof of my gentle decline, a harmless occupation for an old woman with nothing left to do. A quiet pastime, a way to keep my hands busy. But my hands were busy. Busy and getting clever. My mind, too, was far from quiet. It was observing, categorizing, and, without even fully realizing it, beginning to knit together a different kind of pattern. A pattern not of wool, but of truth. And though they believed I was just quietly suffering, a small ember of something else had begun to glow within me, a subtle heat that wasn't warmth, but a deep, unyielding resolve. What was it, exactly, that made them so blind to the storm brewing beneath my calm surface? The email arrived, a brisk, official sort of message from Arthur, carbon copying Bethany. It spoke of a crucial family discussion regarding future planning and asset management, to be held at my home the following Tuesday. It wasn't a request for my presence, it was an announcement delivered with the cold precision of a business memo. My house, my kitchen table, transformed into a boardroom without my consent, They arrived promptly, Arthur in a sharp, unfamiliar suit, Bethany impeccably dressed, clutching a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Their initial pleasantries felt as thin as tissue paper, easily seen through. There was an unfamiliar solicitousness, a cloying sweetness in their voices that set my teeth on edge. Arthur even pulled out my chair for me, something he hadn't done since I forced him to at Christmas dinner almost 2 decades ago. Bethany complimented my new shawl, a piece I'd finished just that morning, her eyes lingering for a second too long on the intricate stitches, as if calculating its worth. It was an unusual, almost unsettling, amount of attention. Then Arthur cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that echoed in the quiet room. He spread a sheaf of papers across my polished oak table, papers filled with terms like portfolio optimization and legacy planning. Bethany nodded sagely beside him, adding her own interjections about streamlining and reducing unnecessary burdens. The words themselves were a thick, comforting blanket designed to obscure the truth, but I felt the chill beneath them. Their plan, delivered with the practiced ease of con artists, was breathtaking in its audacity. They proposed, with smiling faces and sincere tones, to manage my home, my investments, my very life. Arthur spoke of selling the house, arguing it was too much for me, and capital tied up unproductively. He presented spreadsheets detailing how my savings, carefully accumulated over a lifetime, could be reinvested into his latest, vaguely defined venture, a venture I knew, from the scant details he ever let slip, was teetering on the brink. Bethany, in turn, chirped about the wisdom of consolidating everything and moving me into a lovely assisted living facility in the countryside. Think of it, Mom, she'd chirped, no more worries. Everything handled. You'll have so much more time for your hobbies, my hobbies. My crochet. The quiet rhythm of my hook, clicking away in the corner of my mind, suddenly felt like a lifeline. I looked from Arthur's gleaming, avaricious eyes to Bethany's painted smile, seeing past the veneer of concern to the raw, grasping ambition beneath. They weren't offering help. They were offering to dismantle my life, piece by piece, and appropriate the salvage. I was not their mother to be cared for, but an obstacle, a last hurdle between them and what they saw as their rightful spoils. The threads of my dignity, my autonomy, were being pulled and tugged, threatening to unravel me completely. A strange calm settled over me then, colder and harder than the neglect I'd grown accustomed to. My hands, resting on the tablecloth, did not tremble. My voice, when I finally spoke, was soft, almost a whisper. "And what?" I asked, my gaze meeting theirs without flinching. "If I have other plans?" After Arthur and Bethany left, the silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with the unsaid words and the chilling echo of their plans. The scent of their expensive colognes and perfumes still lingered in the air, a phantom reminder of their brazen invasion. I sat at my kitchen table, the scattered financial papers like fallen leaves after a storm, marking the devastation they intended. They wanted my house, my savings, my very autonomy, all to shore up Arthur's flimsy empire and finance Bethany's endless whims. Their talk of assisted living had been a veiled threat, a cage presented with a smile. I picked up my crochet hook, the smooth plastic familiar and comforting in my hand. The half-finished blanket, a cascade of emerald green and sapphire blue, lay draped over the back of the armchair. For so long, this simple act of creation had been my refuge, a quiet corner of joy in a world increasingly devoid of it. My children had always seen it as a quaint anachronism, a harmless pastime for an old woman who was slowly, gracefully fading away. "Oh, Mom, still with your little projects?" Bethany would coo, a patronizing lilt in her voice. Arthur would barely register it, his mind already on the next deal. And then, like a single, clear note cutting through the cacophony of their greed, it hit me. That very dismissal, their utter inability to see beyond the surface of my craft, was my shield. It was my invisibility cloak. They would never look too closely at the intricate stitches, never consider the rhythmic click of the hook as anything but the soundtrack to my slow decline. They were so focused on what they could take, on the grand, sweeping gestures of their exploitation, that they would entirely overlook the quiet, painstaking work of my hands. The realization settled deep within me, cold and firm as polished stone. I was utterly alone in this. No one else would stand up for me, no one would believe me over their well-polished lies. My path to justice, to liberation, would have to be woven by my own two hands, in the same way I wove these threads. The methodical, repetitive nature of crochet, once merely soothing, now took on a new, potent meaning. Each stitch was an observation, each row a piece of information, each finished pattern a step towards understanding their intricate web of deceit. My hands, though old, were still nimble. My mind, though they believed it was fading, was sharp as a needle. They saw a woman with a hobby, I saw an opportunity. My crochet hook, small and unassuming, would become my greatest asset, my unseen strategic advantage. It would allow me to listen, to watch, to gather, all while appearing to be exactly what they wanted me to be. A quiet, harmless old woman, lost in her own little world of yarn. They had underestimated me my entire life. Now, it was time for them to discover just how profound that mistake had been. How could something so simple become so dangerous in their hands? My quiet life, once a predictable stream, now flowed with an undercurrent of purpose. The crochet hook, once a simple tool for comfort, had become an extension of my senses. When Arthur next burst through the door, his phone already glued to his ear, I was ready. I sat in my usual armchair, a skein of vibrant crimson yarn unraveling slowly in my lap, my hook a steady blur. He barely registered my presence, speaking loudly into the phone about quarterly projections and investment opportunities for a new venture that sounded suspiciously like a house of cards. His conversations were often punctuated with frustrated sighs and hurried promises. I let the rhythmic click of my hook be my camouflage, my steady breathing a quiet anchor as I meticulously logged mental notes. Client names, potential partners, specific dates, hints of financial strain. These were the loose threads he carelessly dropped, thinking no one was listening. Bethany, when she visited, brought her own kind of data. Her conversations, usually a monologue about her latest triumphs or grievances, often contained accidental admissions. Arthur's been so stressed about the Melrose Project *, she'd mention, filing her nails. Or, I told Mother about * that place in the country *, but she just blinked at me. She'd complain about her tight budget, despite her new designer purse, letting slip details about overdue bills or a gambling loss at her club, always framed as someone else's fault. My hands kept working, creating a delicate lace pattern, while my ears worked harder. I'd nod vaguely, offer a noncommittal, "Oh, dear," and she'd go right back to her self-absorbed narrative, completely unaware of the mental ledger I was compiling. They still saw me as a fixture, like the grandfather clock in the hall, reliable, old, and easily ignored. My craft wasn't just a cover, it was an active form of deception. I would sometimes ask a simple, seemingly innocent question, a leading question wrapped in the guise of maternal concern. "How's that big deal going, Arthur? The one you mentioned to Mr. Henderson?" He'd often provide a casual, dismissive update, confident that his old mom wouldn't grasp the intricacies of his business, unknowingly handing me another puzzle piece. Or, "Did you ever get that little issue sorted out with the bank, Bethany?" And she would invariably provide just enough detail to confirm my suspicions about her financial recklessness. Each piece of information, no matter how small, was a stitch in my mind's tapestry. It was like collecting dandelion seeds, seemingly insignificant alone, but capable of forming a vast field. I wasn't just observing, I was assembling. They were so busy trying to orchestrate my future that they failed to notice I was meticulously documenting their past and present. The quiet hum of my home, once a symbol of their neglect, was transforming into the humming engine of my own careful retribution. My crochet hook, a silent sentinel, continued its work, weaving not just yarn, but the very fabric of their undoing, one careless secret at a time. What secret would they expose next without even realizing it? My crochet basket, once a simple repository of yarn and hooks, now felt like a secret arsenal. With each passing day, as Arthur's frantic calls grew more desperate and Bethany's spending habits more outrageous, the need for a physical vault for the scattered pieces of their lives became clear. My mental ledger was growing, but thoughts, unlike papers, could not be presented. I chose a new project, a substantial one. Not a simple shawl or a small throw, but a grand Afghan, one designed to drape over the back of my largest sofa, something that would be seen but never truly examined. I selected sturdy, thick yarns in deep, rich jewel tones, sapphire, ruby, emerald, interwoven with threads of silver. The pattern would be complex, a series of interlocking squares and rectangles, a tapestry of texture and color that would naturally lend itself to hidden depths. The first step was to create the pockets themselves. These weren't crude pouches stitched on top. No, these would be integrated, clever folds and double-layered sections, invisible from the outside. I practiced on smaller swatches, perfecting the technique. A hidden seam, a series of loops that could be subtly unpicked and resealed, forming a snug, almost undetectable enclosure within the fabric itself. Each opening would be just large enough to slip in a folded piece of paper, a small printout, a miniature USB drive. My children still came and went, oblivious. Arthur would drop crumpled receipts on the kitchen counter, quickly forgotten as he rushed off to his next, important, meeting. Bethany would leave bank statements half hidden under magazines, a careless disregard for privacy born of absolute confidence that I wouldn't understand or care. I would collect them after they left, pressing them flat, feeling the subtle triumph in each discarded piece of paper. These weren't just scraps, they were fragments of their story, the paper trails of their increasingly reckless lives. I worked methodically, my fingers flying with renewed purpose. One day, I found a printout of an email Arthur had left by the phone, discussing a bridge loan for the Melrose project with shockingly high interest rates. That went into the sapphire section. Another time, Bethany carelessly left a credit card statement with an astonishing balance and several gambling-related charges. That found its home in the ruby square. The blanket grew, a vibrant testament to my industry, but beneath its comforting surface, it was becoming a carefully constructed fortress of their own undoing. It was satisfying, this quiet, meticulous work. Each concealed compartment, each perfectly camouflaged seam, was a small victory. They believed I was simply crocheting a blanket. I was, in fact, weaving their evidence, stitching their careless secrets into the very fabric of my retaliation. This was no ordinary blanket, it was a silent confession, waiting for its moment to be unraveled. What precise moment would reveal the blanket's true purpose? The pieces, once scattered and seemingly disparate, began to connect with the satisfying click of a puzzle coming together. Arthur's frantic phone calls, full of desperate financial jargon, found their echo in Bethany's casual complaints about liquidity and unexpected expenses. The crumpled receipts and half-hidden bank statements I'd tucked into my blanket weren't just evidence of individual recklessness. They were strands of a larger, more insidious web. One afternoon, Arthur, particularly stressed, snapped at me when I offered him a cup of tea. "Mom, do you know how much capital is tied up in Melrose? It's bleeding me dry." Later that same week, Bethany, after a particularly lavish shopping spree, sighed dramatically, "I wish Arthur would just sell this place already. I could really use the advance on the inheritance. My investment property is costing a fortune, and I might lose it." The Melrose Project Arthur's house of cards, was not just failing, it was a gaping maw swallowing funds, and he needed mine. Bethany's investment property, I realized, was likely one of the hidden assets her gambling debts threatened, and she needed cash fast. Their schemes weren't separate, they were symbiotic. Arthur needed my assets to prop up his failing business, and Bethany needed her share of those assets to maintain her own unsustainable lifestyle and possibly mitigate her losses. The assisted living facility wasn't merely a place for me. It was a convenient way to expedite the sale of my house, unlocking the capital they both coveted. They were a pair of hungry wolves, circling their prey, each expecting the other to help bring it down. As I worked on my blanket, my fingers deftly weaving a particularly complex Celtic knot, I revisited the contents of each compartment in my mind. The bridge loan, details from Arthur's email, paired with a property tax bill from Bethany's pile that listed a second, smaller property under her name with significant arrears. Arthur's urgent meetings with unnamed investors coincided eerily with Bethany's sudden requests for large sums of money, supposedly for emergency home repairs. They were not just thoughtless, they were actively colluding, their shared desperation fueling a coordinated effort to strip me bare. The pattern was unmistakable: intricate yet brutally simple. They were systematically divesting their own responsibilities and bad decisions onto my presumed financial security. I wasn't just observing their carelessness anymore, I was seeing the deliberate, calculated nature of their combined assault on my life. The realization hardened something inside me, turning the simmering resentment into a cold, clear focus. They thought they were clever, but their ambition had blinded them to the obvious. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness, and I now held the key to deciphering every one of their twisted threads. What specific action would I take now that their entire scheme lay bare before me? The silence of my home no longer felt like neglect, but a canvas upon which I could paint my new strategy. The blanket, growing stitch by stitch, held more than just their papers, it held the blueprint of their interwoven deceptions. Now, it was time to move the pieces from the private world of my armchair to the unsuspecting eyes of others. My first target was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. She was a kind woman, but her fondness for local news was legendary. I invited her over for tea, a simple affair, and presented her with a small, intricately crocheted doily, a pattern I knew she admired. As we chatted about roses and the changing weather, I steered the conversation gently, like guiding a loose thread through a needle. "You know, dear," I began, my voice soft with a carefully feigned worry, "Arthur was talking about some big investment again, the Melrose project, I think he called it. He seemed so stressed, saying something about a very fast bridge loan. It just sounds complicated for an old woman like me to understand, doesn't it? I just hope he's being careful." Mrs. Gable's eyes widened ever so slightly, a tiny spark igniting in their depths. I knew then that the seed was planted. It was not a direct accusation, but a quiet in the back of her mind, ripe for casual mention to someone else. Next, I made an appointment with Mr. Harrison, my family lawyer. Arthur and Bethany believed he was firmly in their pocket, having handled our family's affairs for decades, but they underestimated his professional integrity. I arrived with my latest crochet project in a small bag, a peaceful image of the harmless elderly client. "Mr. Harrison," I'd started, "after discussing my routine we'll review, I've been thinking about my assets. With Arthur's new ventures and Bethany's ambitions, I worry about everything being properly managed. Are there ways to protect one's estate from, unforeseen circumstances?" I spoke in generalities, my voice gentle, but my gaze was steady. I mentioned no names directly, simply implied a vague concern about family finances being exposed to undue risk. I watched his face as I spoke, a subtle flicker in his eyes suggesting he understood the unspoken nuances of my worry. I wasn't demanding action, merely posing a hypothetical question, a mother's quiet inquiry into the labyrinth of modern finance. But I made sure to let slip a casual mention of Arthur's Melrose involvement and Bethany's investment property concerns, framing them as general examples of risky endeavors. These were my first steps, small and deliberate, like the beginning of a complex crochet pattern. Each conversation, each seemingly innocent gift, was a thread I was laying down, guiding unseen hands towards the frayed edges of my children's deceit. They were so consumed with their own careful calculations that they couldn't possibly see the quiet, strategic unraveling I had begun, one subtle, almost imperceptible nod at a time. The game had truly begun, but only I knew the rules. How long would it take before my carefully placed threads began to pull on their deceptive design? They called another meeting, this one more urgent than the last. Arthur's voice, tight with barely concealed impatience on the phone, had demanded my immediate cooperation regarding finalizing the transfer of property and other assets. He'd said Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, would be present, an attempt to lend an air of unassailable legality to their predation. Bethany, when I spoke to her, was almost giddy, already planning how she would redecorate my old bedroom in the assisted living facility she'd chosen for me. They believed their carefully woven net was closing in. They believed I was trapped. I met them in the living room, a space that once felt like a sanctuary, now a stage for their final act of betrayal. Arthur and Bethany sat opposite me, their faces mirroring a predatory eagerness. Mr. Harrison was there, too, quiet and observant, taking notes on a small pad. The large Afghan, my intricate tapestry of their sins, was draped over the back of my armchair, its jewel tones a vibrant counterpoint to the somber mood. My crochet basket, with its half-finished project, sat casually beside me. Arthur began, his voice a drone of legal jargon, pointing to documents that would sign away my home, my investments, my freedom. Now, Mom, just a few signatures, he pushed, sliding a pen across the table. Bethany chimed in, "It's for your own good, Mother. You'll be so much happier there, truly." Their words were like dull knives, meant to chip away at my resolve. But my resolve was no longer soft clay, it was hardened steel. I sighed, a long, weary sound, and reached for the blanket. "Oh, Arthur, Bethany," I said, my voice thin, "you two always were so close. I knitted this blanket, all these months, thinking of you both. A family heirloom, perhaps." I looked at Arthur, a hint of vulnerability in my eyes. "It's heavy, dear. Would you mind taking it for me, perhaps over to Mr. Harrison's side, so he can appreciate the craftsmanship?" Arthur, caught off guard by the request, rose with a grunt. He grabbed the blanket, not by the edges, but by a thick central fold, precisely where I had crafted one of the larger, more delicate hidden compartments. As he lifted it, the weight of the concealed documents, usually so discreet, shifted. A soft tearing sound, barely audible over his impatient sigh, broke the strained silence. A corner of the sapphire-colored compartment, holding Arthur's damning, bridge loan, emails and a printout of his failing business projections, snagged on his watch and ripped, spilling a cascade of papers onto the polished floor. Arthur froze, his face draining of color as the papers scattered at his feet. Bethany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Harrison, however, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he saw the contents. I watched, my heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. Another compartment, the ruby-red one, containing Bethany's gambling debts and overdue property tax bills for her investment property, had also come loose, revealing its own damning contents. "What is this?" Arthur stammered, his voice rising, a frantic, desperate edge now replacing his earlier confidence. Bethany scrambled to kick a loose credit card statement under the sofa, but it was too late. Mr. Harrison calmly reached down and picked up one of Arthur's emails, his gaze sweeping over the high interest rates and the clear indications of financial distress. Then he looked at a tax bill from Bethany's pile, connecting the dots. His expression, once neutral, now held a profound, quiet condemnation. The careful facade of my children's asset management crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The silent confessions woven into my blanket were no longer silent. They were laid bare, undeniable, a testament to their deceit. The threads they believed they had cut from my life were now unraveling their own. What would their first frantic attempts to salvage their crumbling reputation look like? The silence that followed the scattering of papers was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by Arthur's choked denials and Bethany's frantic, whispered pleas. Mr. Harrison, however, did not panic. He calmly gathered the documents, his movements slow and deliberate, a silent judge sifting through the evidence of their avarice. His gaze moved from the crumpled bridge loan emails and failing projections of Arthur's Melrose project, to Bethany's credit card statements and overdue property tax bills, each piece confirming the pattern I had so carefully discerned. "Eleanor," Mr. Harrison said, his voice measured, devoid of his usual familial warmth, "I think we need to have a very serious discussion about these allegations." He wasn't looking at me, but at Arthur and Bethany, whose faces were now sickly pale, their earlier arrogance replaced by naked fear. Arthur tried to bluster, to dismiss the papers as misinformation, or outdated, but the words died in his throat as Mr. Harrison held up a signed loan agreement. Bethany simply wept, a theatrical display that failed to move anyone. Within days, the consequences began to unfold. Mr. Harrison, true to his professional integrity, advised me to secure my assets immediately, freezing the accounts they had hoped to plunder. He launched an independent investigation into Arthur's Melrose project, and the preliminary findings were damning. Whispers began to circulate in the local business community, subtle at first, then growing into a crescendo. Arthur's carefully constructed professional facade, already cracked, shattered under the weight of financial scrutiny and accusations of mismanagement. Investors, alerted by the subtle hints I had seeded, and now seeing the undeniable paper trail, began to withdraw their support. The house of cards I had observed from my armchair quickly began its collapse. Bethany's unraveling was more personal, but no less public. The news of her mounting debts and gambling losses, once confined to my blanket, seemed to seep into the social circles she so desperately clung to. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, bless her curious heart, had a way of casually mentioning things at the grocery store that spread like wildfire. The investment property she so prized went into foreclosure. Her friends, whose admiration she had bought with lavish displays, distanced themselves, leaving her isolated in a sea of her own making. Her attempts to spin a narrative of victimhood fell flat, drowned out by the undeniable truth of her reckless spending. They tried to call me, of course. Desperate, angry calls, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining their lives. But I simply listened to the voicemails, their frantic pleas and furious recriminations like the buzzing of trapped flies against a window pane. My phone stayed silent in my hand. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. There was only the quiet, inevitable reckoning, the natural consequence of their choices. I had not sought vengeance in the heat of passion, but justice in the cold light of truth. And now, the light was shining, exposing every twisted yarn of their deceit. They had underestimated the power of a quiet woman with a crochet hook, and now they were learning the true cost of their oversight. What irreversible step would I take to fully claim my liberation from them? The voicemails accumulated, a chorus of anger, denial, and thinly veiled threats. Arthur, his voice hoarse, accused me of destroying his career, his Melrose project, now a smoldering ruin. Bethany wailed about her reputation, her friends deserting her, her investment property gone. They spoke of filial duty, of a mother's love, twisting those words into weapons against me. But their words, once capable of inflicting quiet wounds, now simply echoed in an empty chamber. I listened, sometimes, but mostly I simply deleted them, clearing the digital clutter from my life as I had cleared the emotional debris. My home, once a stage for their greed, now felt cleansed. The air was lighter, the silence no longer a hum of neglect but a gentle sigh of relief. I walked through the rooms, no longer seeing the shadows of their demands, but the sunlight that poured through my windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the newly found peace. This was my sanctuary, untainted by their avarice. My final act, the last stitch in this tapestry of liberation, was not one of confrontation, but of definitive closure. I called Mr. Harrison. He informed me that my assets were fully secured, insulated from any further attempts at exploitation. Arthur's company was facing bankruptcy, and Bethany was indeed facing significant legal and financial repercussions. He also mentioned their continued attempts to contact him, demanding to know what I intended. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice steady, I want to formalize the severance. I wish to have no further contact with Arthur or Bethany. No visits, no calls, no correspondence. My will, I continued, will reflect that they are to receive nothing from my estate. Not a single penny. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. What they have, they earned through their own choices. What I have, I will keep, and I will choose how to live the rest of my days, free from their influence. He listened, quietly, as he always did. Eleanor, he finally replied, are you absolutely certain? This is quite final. Absolutely, Mr. Harrison, I affirmed, a quiet strength resonating in my voice. It is the only way to truly claim my peace. I am not seeking reconciliation or forgiveness. I am seeking liberation, and I have found it. The legal documents were drafted, formalizing the severing of all ties. It was not a vengeful act, not fueled by spite, but by a profound need for self-preservation, for the right to live out my remaining years with dignity and tranquility. They had treated me as a resource to be plundered, an obstacle to be moved. Now, they were simply gone. Expunged from my active life, relegated to the past. My home, my mind, my spirit, all felt truly, wonderfully my own again. The last stitch was complete, securing not a blanket, but my enduring freedom. What new rhythm would my life take now that the battle was over? With the legal ties to Arthur and Bethany severed, a profound quiet descended upon my life. It wasn't the lonely quiet of neglect, but a vibrant, expansive stillness, like the calm after a long-fought war. My home truly felt like mine again, every piece of furniture, every framed photograph, imbued with a fresh sense of belonging and peace. The sunlight streaming through the windows no longer illuminated the ghosts of their greed, but danced on surfaces that reflected only my own choices. I finally had the space, not just physically but mentally, to breathe. The constant vigilance, the intricate weaving of deceit and truth, had been an exhausting endeavor. Now, the mental ledger was closed, the strategic advantage no longer needed. My hands, once busy with the serious task of collecting evidence, yearned for a different kind of project. I found myself rediscovering old joys, forgotten passions buried under years of motherhood and the expectations of family. I unearthed a dusty box of watercolors, pigments long dried but stirring memories of youthful landscapes. I began to paint again, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence, capturing the vibrant hues of my garden, the shifting light on my porch. There was a freedom in mixing colors, in allowing the brush to flow, unburdened by hidden agendas. My crochet, too, returned to its roots as a source of pure pleasure. The grand Afghan, the blanket of concealed evidence, was carefully put away, its true purpose now a satisfied memory. I started smaller projects, delicate lace doilies for friends, brightly colored scarves for local charities. The rhythmic click of the hook was once again a soothing presence, a gentle companion, free from the heavy weight of strategic intent. It was simply the sound of a woman creating beauty, stitch by unburdened stitch. I spent more time in my garden, nurturing my roses with the same patient care I had once given to my complex plans. Mrs. Gable, my dear, unwitting ally, would often stop by for tea, always with a fresh piece of local gossip, never realizing the part she had played in my liberation. I listened to her tales of the neighborhood, and sometimes she'd ask about Arthur or Bethany. I would simply smile, a serene, unreadable expression, and change the subject to the resilience of my azaleas. There was no need to speak of them, for they no longer occupied a space in my present. The future, once a source of anxiety and uncertainty, now stretched before me, wide and open. I was not defined by my children's absence, but by my own presence, my own rediscovered self. I could travel, read, learn, or simply sit in my sun-drenched living room, and every moment was entirely my own. The quiet hum of my home was a melody of independence, a gentle reminder that the threads of my life were now entirely in my own hands, to weave as I pleased. What enduring wisdom had this journey bestowed upon me? The rhythm of my new life was slow, deliberate, and entirely my own. It was not the hurried, fragmented beat of a life lived for others, nor the tense thrum of a silent war. It was the steady, contented hum of a woman who had, stitch by careful stitch, woven her own escape. Looking back, the path from quiet neglect to this profound peace seemed almost as intricate as the lace patterns I now crafted purely for joy. I often sat in my favorite armchair, the sun warming my face, a new, bright skein of yarn in my lap. My hands moved easily, familiar with the dance of hook and thread, but my mind was no longer charting complex schemes or cataloging careless secrets. Instead, it savored the journey. I remembered the dull ache of their indifference, the sting of their audacious plan to dismantle my life. They had seen a frail old woman, easily manipulated, easily dismissed. They saw my crochet as a sign of retreat, a gentle surrender. And that, I realized with a quiet, knowing smile, was their gravest error. My crochet hook, once a simple comfort, became my silent partner, my trusty weapon. It concealed my true purpose, allowing me to observe their greed, to gather the threads of their deceit, all while appearing utterly harmless. Each loop had been a listening ear, each knot a stored piece of evidence. The grand Afghan, the one now folded away like a concluded chapter, held not just wool, but the undeniable truth of their exploitation. It was a physical manifestation of my patience, my resolve, and their utter blindness. There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that the justice served was not born of vengeful rage, but of methodical, strategic action. I had not screamed, not pleaded, not overtly confronted. I had simply acted with the quiet power of someone underestimated, someone who understood that the most devastating blows are often delivered with the softest touch. Their downfall was not my doing alone, it was the natural unraveling of the flawed tapestry they had woven for themselves, their arrogance snipping away at their own foundations. Now, my days were filled with the rediscovery of simple pleasures. My watercolors bloomed on canvas, my garden flourished, and my home resonated with the genuine peace of true ownership. Arthur and Bethany were distant echoes, their attempts to contact me fading into the past. I didn't hate them, I simply no longer knew them, not in any way that mattered to my present. Their chapters in my life had closed. The tapestry of my life had unfurled anew, vibrant and strong, free from the tangled, poisonous threads of their ambition. I had crocheted my own liberation, a quiet matriarch who, when pushed, found her power not in shouting, but in the steady, deliberate click of a hook, creating not just beauty, but her own unwavering justice. My journey had revealed the profound power in being unseen and utterly underestimated. Oh, my dears, what a journey we've witnessed with Eleanor. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest waters often run the deepest, and the most underestimated hands can weave the most intricate webs of justice. To watch her transform from a woman enduring neglect into a strategic force, all while wielding a simple crochet hook, truly warms my heart. Her story isn't about loud explosions of rage, but the satisfying, methodical undoing of betrayal, piece by quiet piece. In the end, it was her unwavering resolve and profound wisdom that secured her liberation, proving that sometimes the most profound victories are won in silence. If Eleanor's quiet triumph resonated with you, if you found yourself rooting for her every strategic stitch, then you're home here at Vengeful Echoes. We bring you stories of justice, liberation, and the sweet, sweet taste of vindication. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear Eleanor's strength, and subscribe to Vengeful Echoes for more tales of calculated comeuppance. Until next time, may your days be filled with peace, your heart with quiet joy, and may you always find the strength within to weave your own beautiful tapestry of life.